Hola, ¿cómo están? Y bienvenidos a una nueva entrevista de Carta Política. Yo soy Felipe Gali. Y bueno, nos vuelve a ocupar el tema de Estados Unidos. Vamos a volver a hablar sobre las midterms, esta vez con los resultados ya sobre la mesa y analizando un poco la situación política de los Estados Unidos. Y nos vuelve a acompañar el mismo visitante muy especial de la ocasión anterior, Sean Gibbons. Él, recientemente graduado en la Universidad Estatal de Michigan en Política Internacional, nos va a hacer un panorama de la situación política de Estados Unidos ahora que ya tenemos resultados concretos de esta elección tan importante para el mundo. Hablamos de la única superpotencia mundial. So, in English again, I guess I can deal with this better than the last time. So, how are you, Sean? Welcome again to Carta Política.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
We are happy to have you here again. So I guess we can start. The first question is the question that everyone in the world is asking right now about these midterm elections. What happened?
So unfortunately, we still don't have all the results yet, and we'll get more into that later. But the ultimate result that we have right now is that it appears to have been a mixed bag election for both parties. With that, there's some implications coming along with that. So Democrats have retained control of the Senate and have a chance to win another seat in the Senate in the Georgia runoff election. On the other hand, the Republicans are very likely to win control of the House, but they have far fewer seats than they had been projected to have and that they had hoped to win. In terms of the worst loss for Democrats, I think the loss of Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin in the Senate election was their worst loss. It was within 1%, and they were really hoping to make another pickup in the Senate to expand their Senate majority. But that loss was very hard on them. For Republicans, their failure to gain the Senate seat in Nevada completely blocked them from their chances of winning control of the Senate. The best win for Democrats appears to be picking up the Senate seat in Pennsylvania, in addition to some statewide victories in Michigan and Colorado, and the fact that they elected all current incumbent senators across the ballot across the country. And for Republicans, their best win was picking up that governorship in Nevada.
Looks like a very difficult result to explain. I mean, we have a lot of different competitions, and there is a lot of different results. There's look like there is not a clear winner, but who would you say was the big winner of the elections? I mean, the Republicans expect a lot, but did not get what they want ultimately. What can you say about that? What do you think is the big winner of this election?
Yeah, it's very clear that it appears that Democrats won the narrative of the election. Historically, the opposition party of the presidency makes big pickups in midterm elections. And the Republicans not being able to pick up the Senate is a very big loss for them. And even so, there were projections that Republicans could win as many as 230, 240 House seats. They'd be very lucky if they win 220 House seats when majority numbers at 218. That is a very slim majority in which both parties will be very close in being able to control their caucus. And that is a very tough pill for the Republicans to swallow. Some other things about the narrative. In everywhere where there was a proposal where the issue of abortion was on the ballot, it appears the pro-choice perspective was able to win, in which it was either legalizing abortion or making abortion more accessible in states. Now, only a few states in America use ballot proposals, so the issue is much more likely to be reflected on Republicans tend to be more pro-life and Democrats tend to be more pro-choice. So whoever won the respective governorship and state legislature is more likely to have control over the ultimate decision on that issue.
So, although there was no red wave, but still Congress remains very complicated for the Biden government. I mean, how do you see the next 2 years of administration? Do you think this will be difficult?
Yeah, it appears that it'll be very difficult for both parties, especially the Biden administration, now that they've lost, have appeared to have lost the House, as we're still getting some of the last results in. With control of the House, definitely expect Republicans to launch more committee investigations, as the opposition party often does, investigating the Biden administration and Democrats. Expect tense budget negotiations and legislation to be extremely hard to pass. Even if Democrats are able to find some moderate Republicans to pass some bills, they'll have a lot of trouble getting through a clear budget that both parties want to pass, especially as more progressive Democrats have been elected to their caucus, less willing to compromise with Republicans. As for Democrats in the Senate, expect them to focus very heavily on nominating federal judges. The Senate has the power to nominate federal judges, and now that they have retained their control of the Senate and lost the House, they'll focus a lot of time towards appointing, having Biden appoint judges that he views are fit for those roles, who will often be more Democratic Party aligned or in line with a lot of the politics of the Democratic Party.
Okay, and we see that the Senate remains in the hands of the Democratic Party, but there is still a runoff in Georgia. How do you see this scenario?
Yes, this runoff election, which will happen, I believe, on December 6th, is going to be a tight race between Democrat Raphael Warnock and Republican, his last name's Walker, Herschel Walker, yeah. It's too early to make a full prediction, but I believe the Democrats are in a great position to win this seat. Herschel Walker was very scandal-ridden, and it appeared that he was carried by other Republicans in his final ballot performance, where he got around 48.5% of the vote. I think as the scandals will be heavily focused on, and he'll be the only Republican on the ticket, it'll be very hard for him to gain the votes necessary to win a majority of the vote against incumbent Senator Warnock. And I would say it's more likely that Democrats win that seat than Republicans on that runoff election.
What can you say about the gubernatorial elections? An interesting result?
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of interesting results. Overall, Democrats are in control of 23 seats, and Republicans are in control of 25. They're very heavily expected to pick up Alaska's governorship, but Arizona is the election that is still very unclear who will win, as it's a 50-50 race, and they haven't counted all the ballots yet. In terms of the long shot races that people were hoping maybe Democrats will make a victory in Oklahoma or Republicans will win in New York, almost all of those ended up how conventional wisdom would expect. Republicans won by a lot in Oklahoma, and Democrats still won pretty substantially in New York, even though it was a tighter race. In terms of the big pickups, Republicans picked up Nevada, whereas Democrats picked up Maryland and Massachusetts, as incumbent popular Republican governors in those two states stepped down, and their successors were not able to defeat the Democratic wave in those states. In addition to all of that, Michigan and Colorado expanded legislative majorities for both Democrats and for Democrats in both states, so that the Democrats there had a very substantial result, trouncing their Republican opponents. And in Florida, particularly, Republicans had the opposite result, where Republicans trounced Democrats and won by as much as 18 to 20% of the vote, which was originally expected to be a much more closer race. So like I said earlier, the midterms were a very mixed bag depending on the state for both parties.
Are the results in Florida a bad news from Donald Trump's leadership?
Yeah, I would say actually the result in Florida really ups the national fame and discussion around Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is probably seen as the most well-known Republican governor at this time, based on a lot of what he's done in Florida in the past 4 years. And his performance of trouncing a Democrat in his home state, while a lot of Trump-endorsed candidates, and especially Trump-endorsed candidates who were talking about specifically election denialism of the 2020 election, were very badly defeated all across the country, be it in Arizona, Pennsylvania, or Michigan. DeSantis focused a lot more on home issues and other issues other than the election denialism. And while it's still unclear who the ultimate contenders of the 2024 presidential Republican primary will be, expect Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis to be two of those key contenders.
Okay. We understand that a lot of money, billion and billion of dollars, were spent on the campaigns for these elections, equivalent to the GDP of some countries. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the most important issues that is being overlooked in these midterm elections. As reported from NPR, $17 billion were spent on these elections. That's billion with a B. Around $9 billion was spent on federal elections, so like our Senate elections, our House elections. Around $8 billion was spent on state races all down the ballot. So that is a sign that we are spending much more money than should be spent on elections, in funding ads, in funding, campaign payroll, and in funding all kinds of different, consultants and groups like that all throughout the election cycle. And this number of 17 billion is so much that it's very clear that there's some necessary need for campaign finance reform to regulate the amount of money that can be raised and spent. We have a lot of outside spending in our elections that while campaigns have heavy regulation or have some regulations on what money can be raised and how much they can raise, these outside organizations called PACs, or in some cases super PACs, often are able to raise money from all kinds of different sources that are very hard to trace, and they're able to spend as much money as they'd like on our elections. And it appears that we need some type of regulation of these institutions to make sure our elections are not heavily influenced by these outside dollars.
So with all the money spent in these campaigns and the opacity of the electoral system, the slow counting, I mean, we still don't have the complete results. What can you tell us about the problems of the United States democracy?
Well, it's pretty clear that the U.S. elections aren't being rigged or manipulated in any way. Slow counting, I believe, heavily hurts the trust in the process that people have. When you have an election, you kind of expect the results to come in the night of the election, or in some cases, if it's really close, maybe 2 or 3 days. The fact that we're 5 days out from the midterms and we still don't have the full result, I think is pretty dangerous for the amount of trust that Americans have in our electoral institutions. We should get results a lot faster. In terms of the amount of money spent, I think a lot of people are tired of seeing a lot of the outside spending ads in our elections. And I think we also need to worry about how much, the ultra rich in America have in terms of being able to spend money and sway elections to fit whatever their interests are. Our elections should be defined by the vote of the people and not the airwaves that are funded by outside forces influencing the vote of the people. And it's very important that some form of campaign finance reform is implemented to make sure that not as much money is being spent. And then just a last point, I think a lot of voters are being informed by political ads rather than, the independent media that we have, which I think is a pretty bad precedent for democracy.
Thank you very much, Sean, for this minutes, for this interview. Y muchas gracias a todos los que nos están viendo y a todos los que nos van a ver. Nuevamente pidiendo perdón por mi inglés. Con esto terminamos esta nueva entrevista de Carta Política. Les recuerdo que nos pueden seguir en Twitter como @politicacarta o en Instagram como Carta Política. Los invitamos a suscribirse a nuestro canal de YouTube y nos estaremos viendo en futuras entrevistas. Muchas gracias.